So we've gotten over our skis on debt. The Fed is going to try to print their way out of this. All that does is create inflation. They try to break the back of inflation with high interest rates, but so many people got themselves into debt in the good times on variable interest rates, or that they bought long on something like a bond where it devalues based on what happens with the interest rates. So as the interest rates go up, either people just can't make their interest rates payments, or the debt that they were holding goes down in value. Okay, so you've got this moment where a lot of people are about to lose money, and a lot of people are going to be very uneasy. And you've got the political divide that's continuing to escalate. We saw the last election cycle here in the US where people stormed the Capitol. It was a very sort of unnerving moment. And now it's like, well, things weren't nearly as bad then as they are coming into the 2024 election. So I start thinking, okay, what is the safe move? And if I'm honest, Ray, I start looking at, where do I live? So is there a move to be made within the US? Or I start thinking, do I become a more globally mobile citizen? Is there something that I should be thinking about there? I've got a lot of my money in cash. And then one thing that we didn't talk about, which we probably should, you mentioned the word hard money. And so hard money, I'll give my layperson's definition. And then if any of this is inaccurate, please let me know. But hard money being something that has intrinsic value. So gold, precious metals become something that I start thinking more seriously about. Now, I'm what I'll call a digital native. So I think about Bitcoin is something on my radar. I know that you're maybe not a fan. But anyway, that's how I'm thinking about the world. I'm trying to be in cash. I'm not trying to be in anything long. I have, Ray Dalio, I have zero leverage. I don't play with leverage. Even when the money was free, I didn't take on any leverage, because that's the one thing that scares me. So safety is how I'm thinking about things. Now, I don't exactly know how to diversify well, but that becomes another part of how I look at this. And you've got the all-weather strategy that I know you've tried to articulate for people. So safety first, if I had to sum up my stance.
Everything you said is beautiful and very similar to the way I think, and I'll add a couple of things to it. But when we think about safety, we have to think about that as purchasing power, because a lot of people think if I put my money into a treasury bill, I get safety. Well, also look at whether that's giving you a return that's compensating for inflation. So I just wanted to tweak what you said.
That's a very important tweak. And now you're getting into where I feel undereducated. So how do we then think through that?
Before I go there, I want to say, and also here's the other advice. And maybe we're all wrong. Maybe there's nothing to worry about. Okay. So how do I deal with that? Like what this guy Dalio is saying is very crazy, and you know, who knows whether he's right or wrong, and you know, he's been wrong in the past, and who knows if it's right. And simultaneously. So okay, that's exactly what you said is the way pretty much I look at it. What you said, and if I was to paint the world, I painted the world the way I did. Okay. And I have those questions. And then beyond that, I say, you as an individual should think about the total safety, including maybe that terrible scenario doesn't happen. Okay. That's what I'd like you to do. That's what I'd like you to do. And if you do that, you will come to a better balanced position. I want you to get balance. Okay. I want you to do certain things. I want you to have enough savings, whatever, you know, that, okay, to have security, to build the first level of, I think investing, which is the same as savings, comes in tiers. Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 on risk. And the first tier is if everything goes wrong, I'm okay. And everything could be inflation, depression, anything, whatever it is. I lose my job. I whatever it is, I got that thing covered. Then your next level is, okay, what am I going to get the highest returns? What is my best bet? Okay, but start at that level, and then you said the other thing too, that it's not just the investment, it's where am I? Am I in the middle of a fight? Like, I don't want to be in the middle of a fight. Okay, what's it going to be like? So it does have geographic implications. I don't know, maybe it's the state or the state you go to or the city you go to or the country you go to or whatever it is, and there are certain things you can do to say this one's going to be better than that one. Let me give you an example of that. There are three things you could do based on these three influences. Are you going to be in a place and around people and circumstances that are financially strong? In other words, the income better are they earning more than they're spending, and they have a good balance sheet? Because that means stability. If you can go through that, then you have stability. Places that are like that are better off. Number two, do they have internal conflict? Country, place, and is it a hospitable environment for me? Okay, that's the second. And then third, are they in the risk of an international war? Like, I don't want to be where the fighting is. I really don't. And I want to be safe and stable and so on. So this is a time for looking for such things.
Yeah. Okay. While deeply unnerving, I think incredibly important to think through that. Let's talk about diversification, doing that well. You talk about uncorrelated assets. And I don't know how much you talk about this publicly, but I'd love to understand. It seemed like for people that don't know your background, you have a meteoric rise. You're in your 30s, on top of the world, unbelievable success. You make a huge bet on something, to your point earlier about have the humility to know that you may be wrong. You made a huge bet on a collapse, and it didn't play out. And it ended up that the market went up and you lost a lot of money, almost lose Bridgewater, managed to keep it together. You come up with a new strategy that I believe is known as pure alpha. It ends up getting tested multiple times in the market, and you guys crush when other people struggle, which leads you to be, for people that don't know, the largest hedge fund.
We made money in 28 of the last 32 years. We never had a really bad year. We made, I think it was during my time there, running at 11.8% a year, with the worst year being, I think it was down, I don't know, 10 or 12% sort of thing, and the next worst year being like down 1%, and we did that by simultaneously looking for opportunities and looking for good returning assets that were not correlated. Diversification of good, and just as you point out, what happened was, and by the way, those returns are not correlated with the stock market or whatever. So they were stock market, bond market, they're uncorrelated. So they were effective diversifiers in portfolios, which almost all go up and down together. And this was diversification. And so it was loved by investors, institutional investors, and so on. And the thing, and as you point out, what I learned from, basically this punch in the face mistake, okay, this painful mistake, is I learned how to make good money without having big loss. I learned how to improve my return relative to my risk. And I learned that the holy grail of investing is 10 or 15 good uncorrelated return streams. Okay, you get that and you will, I don't know, have a similar path to the path I've been fortunate enough to have. And so that's what I want to pass along to people, like you go into the COVID year, the one year that we lost, I don't know, it's 10 to 13% or something, was 2022 because COVID came along. I didn't have COVID in our system. We had other things. So that was it. And so there's, something comes along all the time for anything. Everything has its time. And so you put your money in any one thing. You could think, oh, okay, movie theaters are good, and then you get COVID, or cruise lines are good, and then you get COVID, and whatever it is good. Well, it's good sometimes, but there's always something that always is going to mess up the one thing. So you don't want, like, in my opinion, you don't want more than 10% of your money in anything, and you want, probably you don't want more than 7.5% of your money in anything, and they want to be good, different things. And that's the message I'm trying to convey.
Right now, one of the things that has me the most unnerved is the attack on the dollar. So you've got the BRICS nations, for people that haven't heard that acronym before: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are getting together. And I know this has been going on for quite some time, so I don't know if I should be overly paranoid about that in this moment or not. But again, going back to those indicators that point to a transition from phase 5 to phase 6, do you think there's anything that we can prepare for as we look at the big cycle, as we see this particular moment with the assault on the dollar? Is there anything in the big cycle that can educate us on how to deal with this moment?
Just all happens over and over. The decline of the British pound as a reserve currency. Before that, the decline of the Dutch guilder as a reserve currency, all happened for the same reasons, which is, two things are going on. First of all, they're holding all of this dollars, and the stuff that we talked about is going on. And then also there's the weaponization through sanctions of the dollar. In other words, the United States' greatest weapon to use, as distinct from its military weapon, is sanctions. And so sanctions mean you freeze other assets, you freeze assets. Those assets are the bonds. And so that happened with Russia, and there are threats of it with other countries, China, and so on. And there's kind of the thinking, well, if I hold the bonds, can that happen to me? And and then why am I transacting in this other third currency rather than transacting directly? So, for example, the United States share of world trade has declined, and China's share of world trade has increased to become greater. And so if two countries are trading, let's say Saudi Arabia is trading with China, why do they buy? Why do they go to the dollars in order to do that? No good reason to go to the dollars, and they don't know that. Then they're worried about holding the dollars because they might get sanctioned, and so you see more of those transactions taking place in other currencies, and then the usefulness of the dollar as a storehold of wealth changes. It's like, think about it in, the most fundamental way. Everybody wants a medium of exchange and a storehold of wealth. So in other words, if everybody's using the dollar in world trade, then you want to save in dollars, because you say, okay, now that's the thing I spend in, and I save in the dollars. But over time, as the share of world trade goes down, why aren't they denominating in like China has a larger share of world trade? Traditionally, the countries that have the world's reserve currency have the largest share of world trade and the largest share of world capital flows. And because the United States has declined, and also there's a worry about that, holding it because of sanctions. I mean, just imagine how the Chinese must feel about having a lot of money in treasury bonds. Like, I would be worried that I would be treated like Russia would be treated. It's not something I would want to hold as a safe asset. And other countries who might feel that they can get sanctioned, and for all those reasons, they're less inclined to hold. And when we call dollars, what we're really calling is dollar debt, because you hold dollar debt. And that's what is a debt? It's a promise to receive currency. So, okay, so now getting out of those things and transacting in other currencies seems to be the safer thing to do for those countries. And so that's the dynamic that's taking place. So it's not an attack on the dollar. It's like, I don't want to hold those things. And so very similar to on the British pound, what happened is the British had the war, and they were the most powerful empire ever in the world. And they had World War II, and they came out of World War II financially in debt, a lot of debt. And who held the debt? All these countries held the debt because that was the residual from that. But they had a problem. They had a debt problem. And so they needed to print more money because it was too much of a squeeze. And then you had, so it deteriorated, and then they sort of said, please hold my debt, please hold my debt. They went to Commonwealth countries, the part of those that were in the former British Empire. And then you had the Suez Canal incident, where there's sort of a war, and everybody realizes, well, hey, wait a second, that British Empire ain't the British Empire, and they're heavily in debt. And then they say, I don't want to own that debt. And there went the British pound. So that's just how the mechanics work.
Okay, so looking at the U.S. and I don't want to be cheeky and say speaking directly to the U.S. government, but if I were to be so bold, so if this is that predictable moment where, okay, there are actions that we can take as a country that will either help us keep the world reserve currency status, and there are actions that we can take that will cause us to lose that status more quickly. It seems like, okay, you've got the BRICS nations. They are moving away from the dollar. It seems like that card has already been played. I don't know if you think there's anything that we can do to make that easier. But certainly speaking to printing. So one thing that I've heard recently, and this is a really fascinating concept, that when you have other nations that are holding your currency, holding debt, as you said, they're not like hoarding cash, but they're holding a lot of debt. If we print money, what we're essentially doing is externalizing inflation. So we are causing a devaluation of that debt for all the countries that hold us. Now, we're in a moment with rising interest rates that's causing us to need to print. but creating this really weird, difficult moment where as we print, then we have a need to raise interest rates. But the reason we're having to print is because we're raising interest rates. So it's a very difficult moment. But if we could, going back to your idea, it's how we are with each other. If we could get people to come together in the middle, would one of the things we would want to convince the U.S. government to do is to be very cautious about devaluing the dollar? Is that an important idea?
It's more basic than that, and it's more simple, but it's also more difficult. What the reason cycles exist is that the next stage has been determined by what has already happened in the prior stage. So we are in debt a lot. You can't change that. We got a lot of debt. And if you say, what could you do? I mean, two things come to mind. What you could do is you could be financially strong, and you can not use financial sanctions as a weapon to scare the holders of those bonds. But to be financially strong requires you to not spend more than you earn. That means you either have to cut your spending or raise your earnings. Okay, that ain't easy. Okay, so are we going to cut our spending? Okay, now you look at it. What are you going to, infrastructure programs, I don't know, poverty transfers, defense spending. Okay, what are we going to cut? The world, governments have the same basic economics as people, except for the fact that they can take money from one person and give it to another, and they can print money. That's it. And so when you look at this, okay, you have that gap. You can eliminate the gap by taking money from some and eliminating another and not spending much. Okay, that's not easy, right? Okay, what are you going to... Most governments now don't think, how much money do I have to spend, and then how do I prioritize that? They think, I need to spend on this, I need to spend on that, and I need to spend on that, and they spend on it, and then they either produce a deficit, and then you either have to pay it back with hard money or printed money, and that's situation. So when you say, what could we do? Well, you've got to get financially strong in a politically fragmented environment in which everybody wants more. And you have to, like, be a higher percentage of world trade so that everybody wants to use your currency, and and not threaten the holders of that bonds with freezing their assets.
It is it's a tall order in this moment. It has become so clear to me in the last month since you and I saw each other, how important, the reason that you keep coming back to it all comes down to how people treat each other. So in this moment, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but it does feel like the die is cast a little bit. I don't see how we pull ourselves back from the precipice, because to your point about being fiscally responsible, like we'd have to get into a position where we're making more than we spend. I want to circle around to something. As you were talking, you mentioned infrastructure, and it got me thinking about, okay, what are things that we would need to go right? So I think everybody is aware, and I've heard you say that there are changes that are going to need to be made to capitalism in order to bring back a thriving middle class, and the importance of the thriving middle class. And you've defined the things, again, staying to the theme of principles here, of the three things that we need to do to be strong as a country, or for any country to be strong. and you said two parents in the home, great public education, and then equal opportunity. Where do you see us on those? Are we moving in the right direction, moving in the wrong direction?
Well, again, maybe I aspire too much to two parents in the home. It's certainly better if you have two loving parents raising a family. That's good, but maybe that's too much to ask for. But in other words, good parental guidance. Okay, you're raised well, you're educated well. You can go to a public school that educates you well, and you have good guidance, so you're well raised in a healthy environment. And not only do you learn, skills and all that, but you learn how to behave well with each other. So you learn civility, and so you come out capable and civil to a land of opportunity in which you can, work and have a good environment. And really, that's all you need if a society does that, right? And I think where the things that are going on. Education in a lot of public education is deteriorating. It's a real problem. My wife works to help the poorest school districts, the poorest people in the state of Connecticut. And the state of Connecticut it's always 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the highest per capita income.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. Whether you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today.
And in the state of Connecticut, as of the last survey, 22% of the high school students have either dropped out of high school,
Whoa,
or have absentee rates which are greater than 25% and are failing classes. So they're living in areas that don't have the things I'm talking about parents' nutrition and so on. And there's not adequate resources for them. For example, during COVID, we found that 60,000 students didn't have computers or connectivities to take classes, and the government wasn't going to provide it. So philanthropically, we bought 60,000 computers and give it to the kids, but we can't do that. So our society is, when you look at this, you see drug problems. You see how the cities are changing. The cleanliness of the cities, the education levels of the cities, mental illness, crimes, and so on. You're not seeing, you're seeing people fighting with each other a lot. Not all the time. There are wonderful places in the United States. Education, some of the best universities, their pockets, some of the their neighborhoods, but there is this encroaching. So you see infrastructure breaking down, school shootings. I don't, okay, so you decide, how are we doing?
I think we're doing pretty badly. I don't know. I mean, look, it's not going to be a popular thing, but I think going back to what you were saying about the parents and maybe asking for two people is too much. Look, I get it. I think everybody's doing their best, and God knows, for any single parents out there, you have my love and respect. That it just seems like a hard job when there's two of you, let alone one. So I'm not throwing shade, but in terms of cultural momentum, when I look at people not getting married before they have kids, incentives that end up leading people to where it's actually more economically advantageous to have a child when you're single, does not strike me as a great idea. And trying to reverse that trend, I think, is going to be really important. Really putting a ton of time and energy into making sure that we are looking at ourselves on a global stage from an educational standpoint, and understanding that we're competing against, I mean, just to really make it stark, we're competing against China. Now, I have employees that grew up in China. I actually have some contractors that are in China currently. And when I see the discrepancy of what demands the educational system places on them when they're young versus the demands that we place on our students when they're young, it creates a ripple effect as they get into the workforce in terms of just the expectations that they have of themselves, the drive, the desire to excel. So these strike me as really, really problematic things. I'd love to talk to you about Singapore. So as we're talking, and I haven't studied Singapore very closely, but when I think about, how they've created something that seems really amazing very recently and sort of born up out of nothing, is it those three principles? Two parents in the home, quality education, equal opportunity. I mean, is that it, or is there something else?
Earn more than you spend. Be well educated to help you earn more than you spend. Be civil with each other. Be productive. When you come out equal opportunity, and it's not just like in Singapore, but it's true in other countries. There's a level below which nobody should go. Certainly children should not go, right? How can you have an environment that children, there should be basics of housing, healthcare, certain basics, because otherwise you build a cycle. I mean, when the children become adults, you might say, oh, it's up to them to do it. But if you mess up the children early, they become the adults who can't do it. And so you have this cycle, in which you have to take care of people. You walk around and look at it. You can see the gaps, the opportunity gaps. You can see the mental illness gaps. Walk down the street and, downtown Manhattan or lots of places, and see the gaps. Okay. And that adult who is screaming, and homeless and whatever, came from a place, a reason, that made him that way. And, so it's like why isn't the computer given to the kid who doesn't have a computer so he can have learning? Think about how difficult it is for the kid who doesn't have learning, and they have one parent, and that parent might have in a poverty and might have drug problems and all that. I mean, the kid can't make it. So the kid's going to come up to be an adult. Okay, what kind of an adult is it? It's going to be a problem.
So I know that a lot of people are going to say, okay, well, raise taxes, we'll have money for all of that. That doesn't seem to be how things work, but I'm open to being wrong about that. There's a book coming out I'm very interested to read called Taxes Have Consequences, which I don't think people think a lot about, but it is entirely possible that I'm wrong. So if we look at someone like Singapore, do they just have really high tax rates and they distribute it in a way that makes sense?
What they did was they required savings.
They require it?
Require savings. An employee I think it works like this. Employee gives 12% of their incomes. An employer gives 22%, 10% of their income. So they saved something like 22% of their income is in savings. Okay. They do other things too. They have a tax balance, but they have a savings. And as a society, they earn more than they spend. Okay. So, and then on housing, for example, they have a public housing that is subsidized, that the person can take their savings with to use to buy that public housing that is a saving through that saving. So everybody has good housing, good public housing, and they own it. So if it goes up in value, they can sell it, and so they have that. So the housing creates a good environment. They put a lot of money into education, equal education. It's not people there don't have to go to a private school to get good education. So they have good education, and then they have the people who work hard and are civil with each other, and that's how it works. And forget about Singapore. If you look through history, these are basic fundamental things. So wherever they've happened in history, they've worked, and you can go back through all history. If you these basics, earn more than you spend, be well educated, be civil, be productive, those types of things. That those fundamentals work.
What is it about the human personality that makes it so common that people don't deploy those things?
It's so interesting to me because I found that when people get richer, the societies get richer, they typically get in more debt, which seems backwards. Like, so for example, I watched the first time it happened when the United States started borrowing money from China. The United States had income that was per capita income 40 times those from China, and they're borrowing money from China. So I wonder, like, how does that really happen? And there's when you don't have much money and you're at a stage of life where you value money, you want to save. So there's a psychological thing. You don't have much money, you get some money, and you want to save it. And to save it means you have to lend it to somebody. Then what happens is, ironically, when everybody earns more money and it's easy to borrow, people will get in debt, or a society will get in debt, or the government will get in debt. And also then there become very big wealth gaps. And people basically are interested in taking care of themselves. And so you have a fight over taxes or something. And so you have a society that borrows. Just even think the political system cycle. People pay, if you're a new politician and you run a state, or you run, let's say, a state, and it's before an election, it's in your interest to borrow and spend, because nobody pays any attention to the borrowing. where the money comes from. They pay attention to the spending. So give them stuff, go spend, give them stuff, have a party. It's like having a party on debt. And there's this short-sightedness. It's like raising kids, they call it the marshmallow test, you ask a kid in early age, I can give you one marshmallow now, or I can give you 2 marshmallows in 15 minutes. Which would you prefer? And, okay, the smart one says, I can defer my gratification for 15 minutes and get 2 marshmallows. We have a lot of society who wants it now. So is it enjoyable to take your money and spend it on better infrastructure? Or let's take the education system. The education system, according to the Constitution, is a state decision. So it's not federal, not mostly federal money. Then you come down to the state, and it's mostly a tax district. If you're in this neighborhood, through property taxes and so on, you will get the money to educate your children in that tax district. So naturally, richer tax districts will have better money. And so like I'm in Greenwich, Connecticut. And last numbers I looked, I'm sure they're higher than this now, but it was not that long ago, is in Greenwich, Connecticut, it was $24,000 per student. In Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is like 10 minutes up the road, it's $14,000 per student.
Whoa.
And they need more money because they're poor. So if you just take, it's not just education. How do you clothe the kid? How do you feed the kid? How do you give them the computer that doesn't come through the school and all that? They need more, not less budget. So those are the mechanics of it. First, you have to go to bipartisanship. Like if I was president, I would have a bipartisan cabinet. And then if I was dealing with the economic problems, I'd get smart people from the right and smart people from the left who want to make this thing work. And I'd put them into like a Manhattan Project kind of thing. In other words, put them into 6 months in which they have to agree on a system that's going to work. Tie them together and force them to agree and come out with that and have them gain control over the extremists who are going to fight. Like, I don't really care exactly how it works, just as long as, like, if smart people from both sides can get together and make it work, and then you come back to these basics, okay, how do you earn more money than you spend? How do you educate your children well, whether or not, and deal with those problems that way in a together way, you'll get the best outcome. If you don't do that, you won't get the best outcome.
Yeah, I think this is really brilliant.
Inflation is one thing I want to really touch on. So what do you do in an inflationary environment? As somebody I don't consider myself a savvy investor. And so I used to joke with my money manager, I want to be as close to my money buried in the backyard as possible. And obviously for inflation reasons, I have since learned that is a terrible strategy. But what do you do?
Well, first thing is you realize that holding cash and dead assets is a bad thing. So a lot of money is in cash because people think that cash is the safest investment. But they are measuring that in amount of money that they get, nominal returns, and they say it doesn't wiggle much. But think about it. It's lost, as of the most recent statistics, 8.5% over the last, inflation is 8.5%, and they receive virtually no interest rate in cash. And so there was an 8.5% loss of buying power as a result of inflation. And so psychology should change and is in the process of changing to realize that you have to think in terms of buying power, not the number of dollars you have. And you have to think how much is your buying power. And so the worst thing is to be in cash. Like I say, cash is trash, and to be and to be out of the bonds. The next thing is to have a diversified portfolio of assets. The diversification means some assets that are inflation hedge prone. For example, you're better off to own an inflation index bond than a regular bond.
What makes something an inflation index? Like what are the nature? Is that going to be gold and precious metals, tangible things? Like what are the things that are resistant to inflation?
Yes, and inflation index bonds, because their returns are tied to inflation.
Interesting. I don't understand that well enough to know how one would do that. Is that worth going into? I don't know what the punchline is going to be.
Yeah, I think the punchline is, if you take a look at it, it's simple. It's like a regular bond, except its payments are linked to the inflation, so they compensate you for inflation.
So is this a government bond?
Yeah, government bond.
Okay.
And there are some tax advantages to them too. So look into them. Okay.
And why don't people just flood into that?
Well, I think it's one type of asset. Now, flooding into any one thing is an issue, but moving from the nominal bonds, in which the government just says, "I'll give you this amount of money," and it has the unbelievable and unlimited ability to print the money it gives you, it would favor inflation index bonds. And it could be other assets. Some people would say something in terms of cryptocurrencies, or it might be those other assets. I think.
What's your take on crypto? So crypto is a huge part of my portfolio. I think you'd be mortified to see just how much so. But yeah, what are your thoughts on crypto?
I think that too much people pay too much attention to one at the extreme of the other. That either somebody's all crypto, or they're all gold, or they're all something. And I believe that that's a challenge. I think that crypto, like gold, is not a productivity earning asset, and it can be controlled by governments in lots of ways. It's been outlawed in a number of places, and it also can be monitored. The privacy element is not secure from governments doing monitoring, and the size of crypto is about the size of Microsoft. It's all crypto combined. And so to be overly concentrated in it, in my opinion, is a mistake. But to have some of it is a good thing. So the question is always what amount of it. So that's I have a little bit about it. I'd probably shock you about how little I have. You would shock me about how much you have, but having some of it. And other things I would say is that geographic location is important. In other words, not just all in US and US dollar assets. I would say that the three things that again I'm looking at if I go down countries is, first, are they earning more than they're spending? Do they have a good income statement and balance sheet? This is going to be very important in the period ahead because the amount of credit that's going to be available to bridge the gap between spending and earning, cash flows and so on, is going to be quite narrower. So a lot of companies even that were able to raise cash and not have good cash flow because of maybe growth expectations in the future will find it more difficult. That'll be true for individuals. It'll be true for countries. So does it have a good income statement and balance sheet will be important. The second is places. How are they working with each other? Is there civility or is there civil war, on the brink of civil war? Because countries where they work well together, they're productive, are going to have a real competitive advantage. Orderly places, safe places to be. What
are countries on the rise in that? So obviously, I'm shocked to say this out loud, but the U.S. would be in a bad place in terms of that. What are places that have great stability there?
Well, there are parts in the United States that are better than other parts of the United States.
Meaning like local government bonds or something like that?
Well, I'm out talking about the like where you want to be, and then that'll be. But yes, it could be bonds, it could be places. I'm talking now the places. For example, we just had the shooting in New York City on the subway. And New York City's becoming more dangerous. Chicago's becoming more dangerous. San Francisco's becoming more dangerous. You're seeing people leave some places for other places. You're seeing them leave, I don't know, to Texas as Austin, or to Florida and so on. So there are differences within the United States and differences from the United States.
So you mean people need to think about picking up and moving and actually going and being in a different place?
Yeah, and those are also the better places economically, because when people do leave, and they do that, those who leave are higher income and higher taxpayers, and as a result, there's more of a hollowing out that takes place in that, which creates an economic problem as well as a lifestyle problem. So I think you're going to see greater differentiation in places, which affects where you want to be and where people who can afford to be there want to be, and also affects what their economies and markets are like. And then the United States. And the third element is, are they financially strong? In other words, income more than expenses and good balance sheet. Are they civil with each other? So they're working together rather than hurting each other. And number three is, are they in a position where they're likely to be in a war, or are they likely to be out of a war? You don't want to be in a war. So, and those places, investing wise, history has shown, do worse because they have to spend more money. There's more problems, more pain that's being exchanged. Neutral countries in wars do very well, as it turns out. So elements of diversification. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, but I would not want to be in debt or cash and those instruments. I would want to diversify well with a bias toward inflation-protected assets. And I would want to diversify between locations, countries, in terms of the investment based on the criteria I've just mentioned.
Okay, that all makes sense. Now, you've said that competing in the markets is harder than competing in the Olympics, which I found funny and distressing all at the same time. You said that you guys at Bridgewater spend hundreds of millions of dollars on research alone, and that somebody like me is going to have to compete with that. So what's the advice for the average person that isn't going to be doing that? And how often should people be reassessing? I feel like in a turbulent environment, should I be looking at this like every week? Like how often, and do you, like if you were managing your personal account without computers, at least with the you know, sort of hyper auto trading, how often are you looking at it? And how do you avoid trying to compete against the best of the best of the best?
I think that you have to understand what a good strategic asset allocation mix is. That is, how to create a good, well-diversified portfolio, assuming that you don't know how to make these buy and sell decisions. Because what happens is, think of it, it's like a poker game, and you're playing against others. And those others are putting in, most lose, most buy at the highs and sell at the lows. Most behave emotionally. Most don't have the same information. So it's a very difficult game. Like I say, you know, you wouldn't think I'm going to go try to compete in the Olympics, but more people think that they can compete in the markets. They think, I think the markets are going to go up or down. And the track records there are terrible for most people, okay, because of those handicaps relative to others. So for that reason, you start off with a well-diversified, balanced portfolio, because diversification can reduce your risk without reducing your return. If you understand how to get equally attractive investments that are not correlated with each other, that diversify each other, you can build a diversified portfolio. It would take too long for me to explain, you know, how to do that right now, but that becomes the headline. I described it in my book, Principles for Life and Work. Also, Tony Robbins described it, and he asked me about it, and then described it in his book. I forgot the name of it.
Money Master the Game.
Okay, and he describes it pretty well. And for that, I direct you there. I'm going to be writing a book. I'm in the process of doing it, about economic and investment principles. And then I'll describe it more completely. But right now, that's the best I can do in this interview.
No, for sure. That already is really helpful. Let's talk about day trading, for lack of a better word. So I think about this a lot because I'm in the world of NFTs as a creator far more than as somebody who's buying them. And as I look at Web3, the reason I don't treat it as an investment, and I don't think of NFTs as an investment class, even though people are treating it like that, they're treating it like a hedge against inflation. Some people treating it like a get rich quick scheme. It's that same idea that the vast majority of the money is being made by, I think, less than 5% of the wallets. And so 95% of people are getting beaten to death, while 5% of people make all the money. And it feels like that's a similar idea to how somebody like myself, who I know enough to like get moving, to do the research and things like that, but I don't want to be in there trying to day trade. So is this, in some ways, you definitely want to be thoughtful about your mix, diversifying, making sure you're going for uncorrelated asset classes, following the guidance that you just gave us. But is there also an element of, don't try to time the market, it's time in the market? And so get my diversified portfolio set and forget, or do I need to be in there, like constantly re-upping, rebalancing, that kind of thing?
It's a little bit like you can start off with, and I think this is most important, what's your strategic asset allocation mix? And then it's like going to the poker table. And then you say, what is my angle? Where's my where do I get to take money away from others because I'm better at it? Okay. But everybody should start with a balanced portfolio. Okay. Most everybody, they have careers to do. And I think they're arrogant. They think they can go in there and they can take money away. Maybe some can, but if you're going to play that game, the first thing is also test your decision rules. Don't just go in and then you say, I'm going to wing it and do it. And because you won't even have enough sample size in your decision rules to know whether you're good at it or bad at it. What? After the first 5 times, you're going to pronounce how you are. It's a learning experience just like any other learning experience, to develop your expertise. What I find is really important is to take my decision rules and test how they would have performed in the past to at least give me some perspective of what I might expect in the future. But you have to think through a game plan and operate that way. So I, by and large, would say, first, the most important things you could do are actually the simplest things you could do, to build that strategic asset allocation mix, not to be out in there day trading your life's fortune away.
That makes sense to me. I want to go back to the idea of, we've got the cycles. It's so far, every global reserve currency ever has collapsed and been replaced. And so it would certainly be hubris to think that the US's time as that reserve currency is going to last forever. But in your video, you showed a guy like holding up the falling line and trying to forestall that effect, and hopefully, you know, carry it out longer, or at least make it a more gentle tapering out. What can we be doing to forestall some of the internal conflict? How do we get, I know there's a lot of momentum going that stops people from making more than they spend at the government level. But are there techniques, like if I could convince you to run for office and you got elected, what would you do to forestall that inevitability?
Well, again, there's those who control the system and what should be done. And then there's what the individual should do, to assuming that they can control the system. So your question really is, I view it in terms of those two parts. What's necessary is you have to earn more than you spend as a society. And so we look at our country as a whole. And so you have to get financially sound.
Yeah, and this is what people talk about with austerity, right?
Well, or productivity. In one way or another, it's the same thing.
So productivity would be make more money. So keep spending what you're spending, but make more money.
That's right. Okay. And that opportunity has got to be as much equal opportunity across the population, because if it is for the averages, may be very misleading. And if most people are not benefiting or have that opportunity, it is something that is suboptimal for the development of the country, because you don't know where the talent comes from.
What's the lever we pulled to do that, though?
Well, let me get it out, and then I'll get to to how I would do it. Okay, but I'm just saying. Okay, what you have to do is two basic things. You've got to be financially strong. So you have to be productive, so that your income is greater than your expenditures, and you've got to be good with each other. You work well together. You're not destructive with each other. You
compromise.
If you do those two things, like you're good with each other, and so you're productive and you're financially sound, you've got to do those things. Now, under those things, there are a number of things. You have to educate your population well. They have to learn how to be civil with each other. You have to provide a system that allows productivity to be good, blah, blah, blah. But to answer your question and really get to the punchline, because that's what I need to do. You need to create a system that both increases the size of the pie and divides it well, okay? And most importantly, divides opportunity well, not just the output well, but opportunity, but also the wealth well. So you have to increase the size of the pie and divide it well. And the way that I would do that is I would start by having a bipartisan cabinet and bring together smart moderates, people who can work on both sides, because I think that the first thing is that the polarity is going to kill us. I think we're going to fight before we're going to resolve smartly what we should do. So I would want to have a bipartisan cabinet, and I would also want to have a program that's like a Manhattan Project, in which I take the smartest from both sides and work to engineer a program that is like that, so that when they come out with the program, there's the moderate left and the moderate right, in a sense, who are agreeing, because we each have our own ways of doing this thing, but what we'll do is we'll kill each other over which exact way we do it. And I think that to have a common bipartisan program that is raising productivity and redistributes opportunity and wealth well is the most fundamentally important thing. So I would have that bipartisan cabinet, and then I would have those moderates have to deal with the extremists on their parties, because I believe that more than likely it's going to be the extremists who are going to destroy the system, threaten the system, because they won't be able to compromise. The fight will be so bad, and the answers do not lie in the extremism.
Yep, I would agree with that very much. So if you were to guess, what are going to be some of the elements to create that are going to come out of that Manhattan Project? Like, if you had to throw some of your own ideas in the ring, I'm sure you've thought through this.
Well, it's kind of like very easy. You could see what happens before. Education and infrastructure are two areas that are fabulous in terms of being great investments, and are not treated as great investments. My wife, particularly, and me peripherally, work in the state of Connecticut for education. I'm going to give you a picture. Connecticut is usually average per capita income number 1, 2, or 3 in the country. And in Connecticut, in high school students, 22% of the high school students are disengaged, which means that they have an absentee rate of greater than 25% and they're failing classes.
Whoa.
And or disconnected means they've dropped out of school and they don't know where they are. So 1 in 5 students, more than 1 in 5 students, education system is failing. They will be on the streets. They will be not doing good things on the streets. They are likely to be incarcerated. There are gangs and gun shootings and so on. That all must end. Okay, that all must end. That there have to be, there's a level, a bottom, to which you can't let the society go. And we've found through largely her efforts and so on, that for $7,000 to $9,000 per student, we could get them through high school and into jobs, and then they become productive.
What is it about that money? How do you allocate that to break that cycle?
There are things that you can do at certain points in their life, particularly between 8th and 9th grade, that you can help them make that transition and understand how they're doing, and then work with providing supports to make them successful. Some cases, putting them in a direction where they go into trade programs, so that they'll be prepared for jobs and so on. But my main point is, that's only just one example. As I see, we're operating a lot philanthropically in different areas, and we see so many cost benefit to creating improvements in great investments that would have a big effect. But it starts with real education. And because you have to have an educated population and a civility, it's a very difficult thing when the children are raised where, it's quite often a single parent in a slum where there's drugs, where there's guns, where there's gangs. Who are you going to relate to? What is your best likelihood of an income? It's through drug dealing and it's with gangs. That's your community, and so on. That cycle has got to be broken. And I'm only giving that as one example. But there are so many cost-effective ways of putting in money. Infrastructure, like to not have laptops and connectivity is today the equivalent of not having running water and electricity, or the telephone. And we see it with education. We were, again, in Connecticut, we found 60,000 students didn't have computers. How were they going to get educated? Whoa. So we got them the computers, but in the society that would allow that, there's something wrong. And then connectivity. So certain basic infrastructure. I mean, there are a lot of good investments that are not necessarily, they don't necessarily come from the business profit-seeking world. Profit is a good, but highly imperfect way of allocating resources, because in some cases, something, building a road may not be profitable, but it might, when the United States built roads and it built railroads and so on, it dramatically increased productivity. So there's infrastructure and changes that that have to be made. And there's great advances on these things, great advances on how to educate using computer technology that also not only helps the student learn, but it also helps the computer learn about the student and how they think. So there's a lot of potential. Think about it this way. The world is richer today. We have more per capita income. We have more technology and know-how. It just has to be redeployed in a way where it maximizes the efficiency and essentially the equality of opportunity, so that we pull together. But now that's a dream, Is it a likelihood? It's not a likelihood, okay? Because people in these cycles go to fight and they're focused more on them winning.
Yeah, I want to put a point on that. So as you were talking about it, I was like, okay, how do we end up here? How do we get people out of this? There's a couple things that I see. So as a kid of the 80s, loving America was cool. And like, it was just natural. All my friends loved America. And recently I had a friend who was like, oh, I went on vacation and I put up an American flag outside my door. And I was like, I guarantee that's going to get ripped down. He was like, oh yeah, it's already been ripped down. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, we live in LA, like this is a major American city, and for that to be considered offensive. So anyway, I think about these kids. So I don't know how much you know about my obsession and why I work as much as I do. I worked in the inner cities. I worked with these kids that you were talking about, like up close. You get to know them, you love them, you want them to succeed, you want them to do well. So you start asking a basic question. They're really smart. Not universally, it's normal distribution, but you've got some really smart people in the inner cities just being destroyed by their zip code. So I'm like, okay, wait, how did we end up here? Like, what would they have to do, know, whatever? And for me, I came down to a lot of this is mindset. Like they've been told the world doesn't want you to succeed, so they don't even try, which if you believe that the world is just stacked against you and that it's impossible, then of course, why would you try? So I was like, okay, we've got to get the right ideas in their heads so that they will take the right actions to learn and get educated. Now, I didn't get deep enough to, learn about how many people don't have computers and connectivity and all that. That's distressing. But when I think about why, because you said in a society like ours, something is wrong if you're allowing that to happen. And my answer to that is you've got the civility quotient of, in some cases, I just don't want to see the other side have their way. So if the right answer comes from the wrong side, then I'm going to fight against it if I'm the other side. Then you've got we can agree that the country is worth loving. So even just saying like, hey, we've got to put aside our differences because we're all Americans. And let's make sure that we are elevating all Americans. It's like, nope, like I can't rally behind the flag. I can't get behind this idea. And so now all these people are stuck in this purgatory of nobody's looking at metrics to say, hey, we're trying things. Is it actually working? And if the metrics aren't improving, then we have to change the policy. But that's not happening because of all the fighting. But I do think that it's partly because you have that, we can't even agree to rally around the country. Does that strike you as a, without patriotism? I don't know. Is patriotism a force for good, evil? How do you see that?
I think good produces a good type of patriotism. So I went through the same cycle, and I'll talk about metrics too. The reason I put metrics in there is, and I'm every 6 months or 12 months, I'm going to update the metrics so that everybody could look at those objective numbers and see, are we improving or are we deteriorating? And I think if the politicians, the people in government, were held accountable for those numbers so that you can objectively see, is education, is the wealth gap rising, is there greater productivity? These are measurable things. You can then see there, and they're not just measurable about outcomes, they're measurable about health. You know, if you have a better, healthy income statement and balance sheet, you are healthier financially and so on. So those metrics we'll put out. But yeah, no, I saw the cycle. United States world order began in 1945. I was born in 1949. And I benefited from it. And it was not just an American perspective, that American dream. It was a world dream. It was the only country in the world where there was really a sense of equal opportunity. I was very lucky. I had two parents who cared for me. They loved me, gave me good guidance. I went to all public schools, and I came out to a world of equal opportunity. That's all I needed, okay? That's all almost everybody should get. Why shouldn't everybody get that? And it was a place where anybody from all over the world could come. And you were not, you could be a citizen. And it was the only place in the world where you could really be part of that and not considered an outsider. So all that immigration brought the best talent. And we operated in a place where there was rule of law and everybody respected the law. There were property protections, and you could make a life that was the type of life that you've had, the type of life that I've had, where we're free to speak, free to do those things, to have opportunity, and so on, free to invent, free to do what you're doing and I'm doing. And that is the American dream. And that was a beacon for people all around the world. That was what the United States was, and so on. And that is good. That is good, okay? Now we have something different. And we have a dynamic which is going on because we all abused that, because we had to spend so much money, because we became decadent in terms of overspending on some things and undertaking care of other things, and so on. And now there's a fight. And that becomes that dynamic. So yes, if we could recreate the realization of what that was, is the American dream, what is fair, how does that work, and rekindle that, then that has a tremendous power in being able to bring that back. But the dynamic of history shows that it's more likely that it goes the other way. But yes, if we rekindle that, the idea of heroes, we don't have any heroes. Why don't we have any heroes? Because we're tearing people down. Heroes are role models, people who we admire. There are many people I admire, and I've seen in my lifetime. We should see more of those role models as examples of how to be. But we're missing that. We've become largely a decadent society that's at each other's throats, and we're in trouble.
When I read Principles, it was really life-changing for me. It was before you and I had ever done an interview. because what I liked about the book is exactly what you're talking about right now, this idea of a bipartisan cabinet. So in my own company, I'm not looking for people to agree with me. I'm looking for people that will challenge my ideas. I'm looking for disconfirming evidence. I want to get the smartest people that I can possibly attract to what we're doing and saying, okay, we need to disagree with each other well, so that we can identify the right answer. To your earlier point, you're going to be wrong so often that if you go into something thinking I'm infallible, I'm going to have all the right answers, you're just headed towards disaster. So my question is, how do we set up a situation where people can disagree well? What is that structure?
I think it starts with worry. I got a principle: if you worry, you don't have to worry. And if you don't worry, you need to worry. Because if you worry, you'll take care of the things that you're worrying about to the best possible way. If you don't worry and you just go headlong into these things, you're going to have a real problem. So I think that you have to have people first realize, what does that picture look like if we don't do these things? If we don't have bipartisan, if we don't solve these problems together, if we fight, you have to see the clarity of those two paths and have people choose the good path. Okay, we will figure this out intelligently to make the best possible thing, intelligently and together. Okay. It starts there. It's not a structure. Where does the structure come from? It comes from people, okay? And it comes from people having a need to create a structure and a way of being.
So how do we get people to worry?
Well, maybe what we're doing. I think they have to worry at two levels. First, enough of us worry that we vote for it, or we use our voting and our others to say, let's vote on together and compromise, and smart people doing these kinds of things, and that's worrying about the society as a whole. And then there's worrying of, as an individual, if they don't do those things, how do I take care of myself? Those are the two types of worries, or two types of impacts you can have, right? So I think they need to think of both of those.
For people that aren't familiar with Lincoln, how much have you looked into him? His idea of a team of rivals sounds like very similar to what you're saying about having a bipartisan cabinet. Is he somebody that you've looked at, or?
I know that I know a bit about Lincoln. I wouldn't call myself an expert, and I know that about him. And I think that's really, really great. Yeah.
So when, whether it's at Bridgewater or elsewhere, how do you facilitate people disagreeing well? Because let's say that you have an intern going against your chief investment officer. Like, how would you? Do you take that person seriously? They have little to no experience. How do you set that up so that you don't waste time, but at the same time, you get the best ideas?
First of all, you explain to people, and you understand yourself, how important thoughtful disagreement is. So you remove it, you minimize it from being something that people view as a fight and get upset about. You have to change the attitude about disagreement so that, if you're in disagreement, then one of you is probably wrong. How do you know the wrong person isn't you? And then also, you still have to resolve the disagreement in some way. And so you have to have in place, first of all, an understanding and an intellectualization of that, so you don't get emotionally carried away in thinking, because I disagree, that's equivalent to a fight. Okay, so you have to change that psychology. And then once you do that, then you have to have protocols in place for doing that. Now, in my book, Principles, Life and Work, in the work part of Principles, I've outlined those things, those techniques that can be done repeatedly. So you have to have a system for that. And, and so let me make it very simple examples of that. If you and I are disagreeing and we sort of want to try to get at the truth, things that you can do is to mutually agree on a mediator. So, okay, you could step out of your argument and say, okay, this isn't working. How should we do this disagreement? And maybe let's mutually agree on a mediator. Like we both agree that person, somebody we can trust and do it through. Okay, that's a good step. Then as you're doing that, carrying that through, you can also say, are you taking in the other person's thinking and replying to that? Or are you just blocking? And there are techniques that you can do to demonstrate you've taken it in, okay, like repeat the other's point, and so on, and then reply to the other's point, and then do certain things like not interrupt. Or in other words, I have a rule, I call it the 2-minute rule. Somebody says, okay, can you give me the 2-minute rule? That means for the next 2 minutes, I can speak uninterruptedly. So there are techniques that you can use to first understand that it's not a big fight, that there's protocols. Okay, then how do you do that in a hierarchy? Okay, there are different ways you can do that in a hierarchy. But anyway, there are many of them. And, we're not going to have the time to go through them, but they're outlined in, my book, Principles, Life and Work. They're in the work principles part of it.
Yeah, that's something that we found really effective here is rules of engagement is how we refer to it. So whether it's the 2-minute rule or something else, but ultimately getting people to understand, I'm saying this in the context of somebody who's trying to figure out how we get, we know that the big cycle has a high degree of predictability, and I'm willing to accept that maybe the U.S. can't remain the reserve currency forever. Maybe we're not going to be the dominant world superpower forever, but that I want to handle that transition out as well as possible. And usually phase 5 to 6 ends with literal bloodshed, and things have to get so painful before people can correct course. And so trying to give people a framework, I know you're saying that maybe I'm looking at the structure too much, but I think in frameworks. So what's that rubric by which people can go into, whether it's the 2024 election, whether I think right now we're still in gridlock with the budget or the debt ceiling or whatever it is, giving people ways to navigate through this well. And so my thing is everything begins with the goal. So what's your goal? And even just getting any group to agree on what the goal is. Now, once we know what the goal is, then we can start saying, okay, what people or ideas are most likely to get us there? How do you stress test an idea? How do you know?
I just want to emphasize, though, as you're doing that, the people have got to agree how they want to be with each other first, before there's a structure. I mean, we can have structure. I can create structure. And we could do all sorts of things. We can have a bipartisan cabinet. We can have the going off for 6 months and doing the project. And we can do there's lots of things we can do. But you first have to change the mindset of going from I want to win at all cost to wanting that. So all I'm saying is when you say, I want the structure and I'm a structure guy, I want the structure and I'm a structure guy too. But it takes people wanting something. And so what is the goal? Like you say, the goal. You start with the goal. Okay, that we're not going to fight with each other in a dysfunctional way. Okay. That we will work together to overcome our differences. that we will be good with each other. Okay. If you put those things there and then judge those things, and you sort of then say, how are we going to do that? Okay. Then you do to bipartisan structure or whatever, bipartisan cabinet, blah, 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 all that other stuff. Then you can come around to it. But you have to, if you're in a I will fight at all cost mode, the structure of the Constitution is not going to work.
I'll give you my hypothesis on the only way to pull that off, and let me know if you see another option. Lord knows, I hope there is one. I've thought a lot about how you sway people into doing something that is more advantageous. I'm usually thinking about it for them. So just what's more advantageous for them. And it all ultimately comes down to you have a leader or a group of people for whom you're trying to earn the respect of. And by earning their respect, you do the right things. So I'll sum it up at the national level. We would need a leader that can actually bring the two sides together. Somebody who has a very clear vision. You've grimaced. For anybody that's just listening to this, Ray Dalio just grimaced hard. All right, so explain the grimace, Ray.
It's like wishing for the tooth fairy or something. I mean, it's like not going to the root cause of why you don't have that leader. Okay, if you look at history, this is one of the great challenges of a democracy, and when it gets into everybody fighting for their own cause with populism, they, and so, Mussolini comes to power to make the trains run on time because it's badly managed and so on. So somebody says, give me the dictator. Give me the dictator, and then I will, and I want that dictator. So that's what we're, okay, so how do you get that leader? Okay, it increasingly, I'm just dealing with the mechanics. So so how do you get the leader? And what do you do with the opposition? Okay, it's almost like, well, you have this fighting of the various types, and do you accept losing? And then does the opposition remain and undermine everything you're trying to do? So it's almost like it gets to mob rule. That's why the dictators come to power. Okay? And so that's just history, and that's all understandable, if not desirable. It's still understandable that that's the mechanics. So to wish and say, okay, we need a strong leader who will get control and make everything go all right, sounds a little bit like wishing for the tooth fairy.
That is how dictators come to power. That is very much the scenario I would want to categorically avoid. So do you see that just as that is an inevitability? Because right now, Ray, to your own point, we are not being good with each other. From what I can see, there is certainly a broadcast signal, and maybe this is a distortion of social media, but I don't think so. Certainly not given the elections of recent. There is a broadcast of a signal of massive division. In a moment of massive division, you get people fighting. In a moment where people fighting, there is a winner-take-all scenario. That's the path to dictatorship. So while my path may be wishing for the tooth fairy to want somebody who's inspiring that can unite people, I'll ask it pointedly. Do you just see it as an inevitability that we head towards dictatorship?
When you say have a leader that way, you're not dealing with the mechanistic determinants to say, how do you get a society that is splitting apart and operating in the way that I describe to have a leader that leads and people follow properly. Okay, you're skipping over that. You can't skip over that.
Do you see a path, though, other than, because the natural way that this plays out?
The only path I can see is the one that I'm referring to. if you worry about the alternative, okay, so if you worry, look at that. What is it? You must not have it. If the more people worry about that, then the more likelihood you won't have that. In other words, if you want to tilt the odds in all the different ways, I don't know, take out the ads, have conversations like this, do whatever it is and say, I worry of what's going to happen. So we must not have that. And we really must have this other alternative. I really want to buy into that other alternative. And you have somebody arguing for that other alternative, like, will you follow? And I'll tell you, the prime Mario Draghi in Italy. Let me just tell you the story very quickly of Mario Draghi in Italy. Mario Draghi used to be the head of the European Central Bank, which was like being head of the Federal Reserve for a number of years. And he and I got to know each other in that. He completed that. And he's highly, highly respected. He's Italian. And Italy has crazy anarchy. Like they've had an average of one prime minister a year, and so chaotic and so bad that all the political parties got together and said, we will be united under Mario Draghi. We will let him lead. We will turn it over to him.
Wow.
And he said, I will do that only as long as all the political parties remain united. Because if they don't remain united, we're going to get into this dysfunctional fighting, and I know it's not going to work. So for a period of 18 months, he was prime minister of Italy, and very loved. People loved him. And then one of the political parties dropped out because they disagreed on his approach for, I think it was handling Ukraine. And he said, okay, now I'm resigning, even though everybody wanted him to stay overwhelmingly. But he said, I can't govern under that kind of a fragmented environment. And, in other words, he knew where it was going to go. So he resigned. And in the period between him resigning and actually turning it over to the new prime minister, we had lunch. And we were talking about these things. And what he was describing and what exists is the issue that we're talking about, the inability of a leader to be able to lead when there's so much fragmentation. And if you look at the history of democracies, and you go back to Plato, Plato's Republic, he wrote the Plato. A lot of people think Americans invented democracy. No, it existed way back, in the Roman and Greek times and all that. And so he looked at the cycles. And what he said was, there's this cycle of these different systems. One leads to another in this way, where what happens is the greatest risk of democracy is an anarchy, because the fragments, it becomes uncontrolled. They all have their interests. They fight and they tear the thing apart. And then, so what happens after that is then you get the dictator. And you get, ideally, the benevolent dictator. In other words, the one who really knows how to make good things happen, and he cares about the country. He doesn't care about his personal wealth and those kinds of things, and they create that. And to create order that comes about that. And then in that cycle, after a period of time, you inevitably get the incompetent or selfish dictator and then you have a revolution, and then you go to a democracy and so on, and these things go in cycles. And so when you're asking the question, of the leader, you're saying, okay, let's create a leader and have them go lead. You can't ignore the fragmentation and the inability to lead in that set of circumstances.
I agree with that. But if you, even in your own example, what you had in Mario is somebody that is able to garner the respect of all the different factions. Now, I understand that it ultimately broke apart, but he is the tooth fairy that I'm talking about. You need somebody that people can unite under.
But it didn't work because of how the people behaved with each other, and it won't work. Okay?
Yeah. Okay, so if we know that people aren't going to stay united for long, what you're saying is the duration that people can stay united is the duration that you can have that sort of peace, prosperity, and the second that you...
How long is that duration here? I mean, let's look at the situation. I mean, it doesn't exist, let alone have a duration to it.
Yeah. Ray, you say very troubling things in a very calm manner, which I think is probably the only way to say them. All right. So as I then step back and I say, okay, the cycles are what the cycles are. You said something earlier, which I think is really important that I want to reemphasize. What's happening now is a determination from something that happened earlier. And so to some extent, you're in a better position to deal well with the way things are, the reality. I've heard you talk a lot about that. The reality is what the reality is. You need to be awake. You need to be paying attention to that reality. And then you need to base your plan of action based on the truth of that circumstance. To do that, though, one thing I think is incredibly important is people have to be able to strip their emotions out of this. I know you're a huge proponent of meditation. How do people get good at removing emotion from the equation so that they can see reality accurately?
Well, meditation is a huge benefit for that. So it gives one both a calmness and a clarity. And it gives one an ability almost to go above everything and look down on it and say, okay, here's how things work. And an acceptance of reality. It's like this serenity prayer. God, give me the serenity to accept that which I can't control. Give me the power to control that which I can, and give me the wisdom to tell the difference. And, just to be able to approach things in an open-minded way, like we talk about, you asked the question about disagreement. How can I approach disagreement? Do I emotionally get into a fight about it, or do I handle it well? Meditation and those types of things, calming yourself down, viewing everything more like it's think of a reality as being like a game, like a chess game. Okay, calmly. Okay, this thing happens, and what's your next move? And how does it work?
Okay, very fascinating. So if you take a chess grandmaster or anybody that's really proficient at chess and you put a chessboard in front of them, they look at the board and they don't have to analyze each individual piece. They know that pattern on the board very well. They know where you are in the game, and so that's a chunk of information. It feels like a very similar approach to the way that you're looking at financial markets, global movements, the big cycle, in that, I can drop you into a scenario. You'd look at a few key pieces of information. You'd know where we are in the cycle. So, starting with the three forces that we talked about at the very beginning. Hey, tell me where those three forces are. You expanded it to 5. But tell me where we are with those 5 forces. That's the chunk on the chessboard that I need. Boom. Now I know how to take that next move.
That's what I want to try to give to people, okay? That's why I have the animated video on YouTube. That's why I have the book, because it's like watching the same movie happen over and over again. You can see it, and you understand the cause-effect relations, so you can understand. So when you ask questions like, how do you get better? And then we deal with the mechanics of that. Like, okay, how do you get financially better off? And how do you be good with each other and not be threatened? I mean, it's just, if you look at it that way and you understand the mechanics, it is what it is. That's how reality works. And then how do you deal with it?
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so in terms of chunking, in terms of understanding where we are in the cycle, one thing that I'm thinking a lot about is as we go into the 2024 election, I've heard credible people say that they think China is going to make a move on Taiwan in the sort of chaos of the division that we have here in the current global superpower. Do you see that as a logical move on the chessboard for China? Is that something that seems plausible to you?
I have very good contact, so I have close contacts on both sides, and so I'm just wanting to say it rather than just throwing out an opinion. My opinion is that there's a political situation in the United States that it's really the issue of how much the United States pushes the issue in Taiwan that makes it risky, because there's a move for of, let's say, hawks or some to defend Taiwan. So let me just give you the facts. If there is I'm going to give you a little history. Okay.
Please.
Taiwan was part of China. And around 1840, foreign powers came into China, and they wanted to trade and do things with China, and China didn't want to do that. And so around that time, they had the Opium Wars. You may have heard that in history, in which the Chinese at the time said, I don't want to trade. You don't have anything that I want. And then they brought in opium that the Chinese wanted so that they would have this trade and whatever, and then militarily won and took over large parts of China, took control of that. And in 1895, it was many foreign powers. And in 1895, Japan takes Taiwan. Okay, fast forward. You go into World War II, and after World War II, the winners of the war get to divide up the world and said who gets what. And Taiwan was given back to China. That's 1945. Then they have a civil war. As usual, the left and the right, they fight each other. And so the capitalists get kicked out by the communists, and they go to Taiwan, and they control Taiwan. Okay, so everybody agrees that Taiwan is part of China, but they argue who controls China. The ones in Taiwan say, oh, we control China, and the ones in Beijing say, we control China, but everybody agrees with that. 50 years ago, so that's a big issue in their mind because it's part of China, and it's been told to them that it's part of China. Taiwan's part of China, but the capitalists, which is called the Kuomintang, they are living in Taiwan and they're not controlling it. So Henry Kissinger first makes gets together, goes to China and deals with reunification, and then Nixon follows. And and there's this argument, and they reiterate that Taiwan is part of China. Everybody agrees on that. And that there should be peaceful unification of China. And that goes on 50 years now and brings it up to where we are today. Okay. So a red line for China is if the United States or Taiwan says Taiwan should be an independent country, that would produce a war. And everybody knows that. All those in government would know that would produce a war. This is a big thing for them. In other words, they call that period of time 100 years of humiliation. It was taken, it's promised back, and whatever. It's in their mind an indisputable reality. Now we're in a situation in which the United States, and particularly some congressmen who are more hawkish, say, good chance they will say, we will militarily defend Taiwan and then go on and sell them more military equipment. So it's very, very close to saying, I will, it's a separate state. So we're very, very close to that particular issue. So what will come, I don't believe China is going to initiate a move to take control of Taiwan, unless the United States crosses that line, pushes that line. Now, so the way that it is understood, and just by different parties, is it's understood by the Chinese to be the way I describe it. Look, it's been promised, it's here. No, that's an uncompromisable thing. And Americans, I think about this communist dictatorial bully that is trying to take a free country, a free people, and in a aggressive way take over them, and that we need to defend liberty and protect them from that. Okay. I just want to emphasize it's more complicated than that in the way that I said. And also, it's like from the Chinese point of view, it's part of the American containment strategy, which means, China has grown and it's become a higher percentage of world economy and so on, and it's expanding. And it's like Taiwan is the lid on this boiling pot. So that's my best description of what the situation is. So I would say, if you want to know what really happens, watch it the way I describe it. In other words, is it unprovoked, or is it provoked in the way I just described it? Now, again, I'm a very realistic person. I'm not an ideological person. I'm not trying to, okay. I'm just like, how does reality work? And what's the move? And what's the next move? And I'm just trying to describe that reality. I'm not taking a side in it. It's just like two sides in a chessboard, and I'm just looking down at the chessboard. And a war is a fight for how the system works. So we'll begin there. After the fight of how the system works, it's a great leveler. It gets rid of a lot of the debts. and it starts over. And then there's a new power. In the United States, the New World Order, it was an American world order because the United States won World War II. It had 80% of the world's gold. Gold was money. It had the dominant military power. It had nuclear weapons. And because of that, we began the American world order.
We literally got people together in a room and said, hey, we're going to be entering literally a new order. And they lay things out. It was in Bretton Woods, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And so I want people to understand, like, this is people, they get together and they actually decide this stuff.
That's right. They carve up the world. Here are the borders. This group gets this piece, and so on and so forth. And then they begin. And and by the way, this has happened repeatedly throughout history. And so they start off with those new rules of the game. And you enter a period of peace and prosperity. And it's peace because nobody wants to fight the dominant power. The dominant power won, and you don't want to fight the dominant power. And
you're exhausted. I mean, and this is one thing you're careful to point out in the book is like, war is horrendous. And so part of what creates that period of stability is just, we've seen so many people die. There's so much destruction of life, wealth, which is why, the stakes are high when you're talking about this.
That's right. And there's a change in psychology really that you're dealing with, because quite often these things take place. They take a generation or more to take place, a lifetime. And the people who enter the war do so boldly. But everybody who enters the war and then goes through the war wish they never went through the war because it's so terrible. But they come out, as you point out, and then the war is over. They want peace, they want productivity, and so on. And it's a great leveler, less wealth gaps and so on. And they work well together, and they build a period of peace and prosperity. That is a long period of peace and prosperity. But during that peace and prosperity, more and more prosperity takes place, and they increasingly bet on that prosperity. And people get more in debt. And so you see the debt levels rise, and you see naturally, as prosperity comes, it comes in unequal ways, and some get richer than others. And so wealth gaps rise. And then those wealth gaps increasingly create opportunity gaps, because the rich people have more resources to educate their children and give them the benefits. And so that happens over a period of time while the economy gets more indebted. And of course, as time progresses, other countries also rise. Those maybe that even lost the war, like Germany and Japan, they rebuild and they become competitors. And so what was a unique power of having won the war becomes less unique as there was more competition. And then you get a new generation of people who have a different mentality. They get used to those benefits and so on. And they are, let's say, less cautious in their financial behavior and so on. And so the classic ingredient also is that country that wins the war also has the world's reserve currency. Because, you need a currency to transact internationally. It's like a language. You need a language to transact internationally. And the winner of the war gets the world's reserve currency because everybody thinks that's the most stable. And they also want to save in it. And so when you have a world,
I think that's important to really double click on. There's two things here that I want to go a little bit deeper. So one of the most profound things I've ever heard you say, and this really hit me, is that there's a reason this repeats over and over. And that reason is there's only so many personality types. And so people just are the way they are. And so if you put them into these predictable situations, they're going to react in predictable ways, which makes this whole cycle incredibly predictable. You can go back, you did a detailed analysis of the previous 500 years, and you just see this same thing happening over and over because, hey, the money's coming in, it's the roaring 20s, but the roaring 20s are going to lead to the 30s style depression basically every time, because people are overextending themselves because they are making the faulty prediction that if I look back at the history of my life, because it has always been this way, it's always going to be this way, not zooming out and seeing, no, you're in a bigger cycle that repeats over and over and over. And the reason I want to hammer this home is since by the end of this, everybody watching, I want you guys to know what to do to prepare yourselves for this. This is Ray's whole point, is to make sure that people are actually prepared, but you have to buy into the fact that this is predictable. Otherwise, you're going to ignore the advice. And so for me, recognizing that people just are a certain way, and that thusly, given similar circumstances, they will react in similar ways. And so that was, I think, really important for me to acknowledge.
Yes, and you could see it not just in the cycle taking place over and over, but if you deal with the cause-effect relationships, they're logical. So, for example, if you have bad financial conditions, as measured by if you're spending a lot more than you're earning, and you don't have a lot of savings, you have more debt or liabilities than savings, you're not in a good financial position. That's a fact. And if you have a downturn, if the country as a whole experiences that problem, and you have a large wealth gap, you are likely to have a fight. I mean, so these cycles don't just take place as cycles. They take place as conditions that are measurable. And so in the book, it was very important to me not to just use words and theories of how this thing works, but to actually show the measures. What is the wealth gap? What is the amount of debt? What is the amount of printing? What are the conflicts that are taking place? Because then you can monitor those things.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. Whether you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today.
Yeah, so this is where it starts to get a little unnerving. So, okay, you recognize these are patterns, they happen all over history and they repeat. And then because you're plotting all of this and you can look at these leading indicators that you talk about pretty extensively in the book, there's 18 that you go into detail. A couple times you break them down into ones that maybe are more important than others. But as you peg, so if there's 6 stages to this arc, you've said that the US is in stage 5. And to give everybody an idea, stage 6 is basically revolution, war. It's the violent restructuring of the economy. And whether we're in the 7th inning of stage 5 or the 3rd inning, I don't know. But the fact that we're in stage 5, which is obviously where there's massive internal conflict, which rings way too true. And the massive disparities, which you did a really cool graph in your video where you show income inequality and that gap between the lines you filled in with resentment. And so you have growing resentment, you get populists on the left and the right, you get internal conflict, people fighting, and then you get a potential external power looking at you going, they're weakened by their internal conflict. And that historically is when a rising power makes its move.
Yeah, so I think there are 3 things, 3 big forces to keep your eye on. And when you see them in their cycle, then it's clear. First, are you earning more than you are spending?
And do you want people to look at this at an individual level or at a country level?
Well, you can at both. I want them to look at it as the country, but the country is nothing more than the aggregate of the people. And so when you look at those 3 forces, I want to make sure that they're clear and you could align them up and you could see where you are. Is the country earning more than it's spending and building savings? Or is it spending more than it is earning and creating debt? Because one man's debts are another man's assets. And when somebody is holding those assets and they're producing a lot more of that money in debt, they go down in value. Money goes down in value as they produce it to produce that buying power. And then that gets people bad returns, it produces a higher amount of inflation. and it produces bad returns for holding debt or bond. So in other words, cash or bonds, and then people get out of cash and bonds, and that produces rising interest rates while there's rising inflation, and that produces stagflation. So I want them to get the mechanics of that, because that's happening now. You could see it. This is not controversial. We are producing a lot of debt. We're spending a lot more than we're earning. And as a result, they're printing a lot of money. And the printing of a lot of money creates a lot of inflation. And with that inflation, then nobody wants to, cash is trash. You don't want to hold cash. And you get out of that. And that causes rates to rise. And that's one of those three factors. So you can see it happening. And you could also see the cycle of it as shown in the book. The second force that is dealing with is the internal conflict force, how you are with each other. Are you operating cohesively, common mission, and moving in the right direction, the system working? Or are you at each other's throats? Is the system threatened? Because history has shown when the causes that people are behind are more important to them than the system is in jeopardy. And that is a risky situation. It's a risky situation because it produces disorder, and it can produce a form of civil war. And at those times, when you have that, you see greater and greater polarity. In politics, it shows up at greater and greater populism of the left and populism of the right. And populists want to fight for their side. They're not moderates. Moderates want to work together to try to find a compromise that's best for the whole. Populists appeal to their crowd by saying, I am fighting for you. And they will fight each other. And that fight can be at the threat of the system. So in history, for example, we saw 4 democracies in the 1930s choose to become dictatorships as one side fights to the other because they become so disorderly. And we have a system right now that you could see that it is possible in elections that neither side might accept losing. And so the system becomes in jeopardy. And you see that the moderates leave the system. You can't be moderate. You have to pick a side and fight. And so you see this in the French Revolution. There were moderates in the early part of it, that recognizing that there were problems and wanting to work together. The moderates got guillotined. The polarity began. The same was true in the Russian Revolution. The same was true in the Chinese Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, and so on. Those polarity gets greater and greater as there's a greater intensity to fight. And that is the internal piece. And so you could see where we are in that internal piece. Right now, we see that moderates are dropping out of choosing not to run for re-election. And you're seeing in the primary system that the fight is who's over most extreme in representing that. And you're seeing this greater polarity. And you see it reflected in many statistics. Something like 10 or 15%, I forgot if it's 10% of the Democrats or if it's 10% of the Republicans, I don't remember, versus 15% wish the members of the other party would die. They don't want them to measure they don't want them to marry their children. I mean, there is a great polarity. And you're seeing that lead to changes in where people live. They're moving to different areas, not just because of tax reasons, but because of differences in values. And so that you can see it today happening, these things, but you also can see the arc of them in the book because it measures statistics. It shows these things happening. So when you have a financial problems and you have this kind of polarity and you have a bad time, you have a lot of fighting internally. So imagine where we are in the economic cycle. We're in the part of the economic cycle where they have given, the government has given a lot of money and credit to people. They've put it out. Well, no surprise, that's leading to a lot of inflation, okay? Inflation takes buying power away from people. And it also means that then there's going to be higher interest rates, and that's going to squeeze people. And so that makes that wealth gap and that wealth issue more difficult. So that's the second force. And the third force is the rise of a great power, the geopolitical force that's going on, that we're seeing today with China and Russia and so on, and how that's changing. Because when the power of a country diminishes, okay, when we get weaker financially, or how we are with each other and so on, there are greater vulnerabilities. And there's always the competitive power that learns how to become stronger. And competition always happens. There's the establishment, and then there's the new competition. And as they get stronger in all ways, militarily and commercially and so on. And that's the dynamic that we're seeing.
Yeah. So we've got Taiwan looming in the sort of political background. You said many times in the book that that's an indicator that you'd really be looking at if there was a fourth skirmish over Taiwan, that you would get increasingly worried. We definitely need to talk about inflation in a minute, because I want to know what people should be doing in that environment. But first, and I don't know if people are like me, but the thing that got me to stop and really start paying attention to this was how far into stage 5 we are. That was the thing that compelled me that I have to slow down. I really have to look at this, because I actually don't like thinking about money, despite my long-standing pursuit of success. That's really been about something else for me. Money has been a byproduct of that. And that's in the book. And I don't know if your number has changed, but in the book, you say that you give a 30% chance of the US falling into civil war, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, and that a major conflict with China at 35% in the next 10 years. And you said, look, it's a guess, but you lay out a lot of data before you say that it's just a guess. So it's obviously a very well-informed guess. One, do those numbers roughly hold for you still? And if they do, how do we pump the brakes on this?
I would say that those numbers probably are a little bit higher now, I would say.
I was afraid you'd say that.
Things are progressing a little bit quicker. Do
you mind ballparking me? If we're not at 30, are we 31? Are we 40?
Yeah, let's say 35 to 40% on each, let's say. Woof. And I'm not being precise, but the events that happened in the Ukraine, and that is bringing all this development internationally up at a little bit quicker pace. It's the same dynamic. There are two sides, and there'll be neutral countries, just like in the war. There was the Allies and the Axis powers, and then there would be neutral countries. And so that part is developing. The U.S. Conflict part is probably progressing a little bit quicker. So, I mean, let's say the odds of that. On the world order, the developments in the Ukraine, maybe I should put those in perspective. Would you like me to do that?
Please, absolutely.
Okay. There is a very close relationship, a common objective of the Russians and the Chinese. So there is a competition in the world, and there's a dominant world power which is perceived as being overly controlling. So the Chinese believe that the policy of containment of the United States, in other words, just right within their borders, that there isn't a region that's suitable for them, in much the same way as the United States. There's always a geographic region that is an area of influence. The United States in the area like the Cuban Missile Crisis, Cuba, when there's a threatening power in Cuba, we reacted to that. That kind of geopolitics, they believe that the United States is sort of containing them, and they are growing in power, so that there's that dynamic. And Russia has the same kind of view, and so that there's a common, let's call it enemy, competitor. And there are 5 types of wars. There's a trade war, there's a technology war, there's a geopolitical influence war, there is a capital war, and then there's a military shooting war. And we are in the first 4 of those wars in this competition.
With China or with Russia?
With China. We're not in a shooting war with China. We are in a shooting war of sorts with Russia and the Ukraine. We're providing arms, and so they're shooting. And so there's a military war going on, and we're in it in our way. So we're at those particular spots. And the capital war is sanctions. We hear the notion of sanctions, and what that means is they're economic, and the way they work is to shut off, to produce economic pain by either not letting them get at their money, or not letting them get to goods that they can import. And these have happened through time. In Japan, that was what set us up for the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because the United States cut off Japan's oil supply, was in the process of doing that, and also confiscated its bonds, much the same way is happening now. And that put them into a corner that led them to bomb Pearl Harbor, and then we went to a military war. So that's where we are now, and that also is risky because it threatens the value of the dollar. Because right now, debt is dollars. Any currency, the way you hold it is you hold it in the form of debt. You don't hold it just in paper. And because there's a rising inflation, and because there's a lot of printing of money, and because there's also a greater fear on a number of countries that they too could be sanctioned, there is a selling of dollar-denominated debt. So you're seeing that the bond market is going down, and interest
started
rates
escalating recently.
Yeah, that's right. And so there is that dynamic that's going on. The capital wars are the ones that accelerate immediately before the military wars. Usually the coffers are empty, they're printing a lot of money, and then they're trying to use economics as a weapon. So we're in that part of the cycle. Now, in terms of how this will transpire, I think there are 3 big questions that we're going to learn about and get answers to pretty quickly. The first is, does Putin and Russia win or lose? I'll describe win as what he wanted at the outset, which is win for Russia would be to have the Ukraine be some non-threatening position, such as a guaranteed neutrality, and for Russia to have control over eastern provinces, and for Russia not to be economically devastated, instead to be maybe have something like a 10 or 12% decline in GDP, and for Putin to be in power. If those 4 things happen, then the cost of his actions will have been worth what was obtained from that. And that would be viewed as a win. It would be then also a loss from the Western countries. The world is looking at the power of American sanctions, because American sanctions are the greatest power the United States has. If it was a military power, the world has come to the position that a number of countries have had an equal ability to do harm to the United States militarily as the United States was have to do to them. And so we don't have a dominant military power anymore.
Wow.
But we do have a dominant sanctions power. So if
we're still ahead of China,
in the United States, in the ability to influence, have economic sanctions is much ahead because it controls the world's reserve currency. That's a biggest asset. But in weaponizing the dollar, it is leading those to get around and not want to hold dollars because they get worried that they're going to be confiscated. So, so we will see if that dollar sanctions power, we'll see how powerful it is. If it isn't very powerful, that's going to be a problem.
because others will perceive our weakness.
Well, and they'll also realize then you only have military power. I mean, think about this way. If this war is not a difficult war for the United States and Europe for the most important, it produces higher oil prices and the like. But while Russia is throwing in military, we are throwing in sanctions. And these sanctions don't cost lives. It's not a military war. So we're fighting it with sanctions and they're fighting it with military. If you didn't have that, how would you fight this war? It would be a much more difficult situation. And the third thing that we're seeing is how the world is lining up. The world is lining up, which, there are in wars, typically Axis and allied powers. And you could see by the actions that are taken as to which are lining up. Who voted in favor of what at the United Nations? Who is allowing what rules? Who is trading with the other party? Russia actually put out a list who are friendly and adversarial countries. You'll see at the next G20 meeting who will be in favor of Russia attending that meeting and who will be in favor of it not attending. And that's making clear how the sides are lining up. So you're seeing those sides line up and all sides are in preparation for war.
There's like almost a distrust now of people that strive for success. There's a distrust of science to some extent. There's, I feel like, and maybe I'm crazy because the stats will bear this out, but it feels like we used to be the place everybody would want to come. If you had that entrepreneurial dream and you wanted to build something and you wanted to generate wealth and innovate something, this is where you would come. And then I look at somebody like Elon Musk, who honestly, man, just seems like an alien. I don't know how he's pulled off everything that he's pulled off. It's absolutely bananas. And yet there are people who just can't have it. They can't have the level of success that he's had and aren't necessarily even looking at it from the lens of the innovations that he's created. Do you think that that's a predictable change in attitude that people have and they lose the desire for innovation? Is it just being decadent, or is there a rebellion against education? I don't know. I was so shocked to hear that there are people that aren't inspired by what he's doing, but instead are like just opposed.
I think everybody's got these opinions and they're so critical and not, if everybody could just take care of themselves. It's like start with oneself. The aspiration, and I think the reality should be to be self-sufficient plus. Okay, here's my view. Success doesn't have to be making the most money or the most contribution. Success for a successful life is that you have the type of life that you want for you. but you earn more than you spend so that you're self-sufficient. And if every individual could do that, you would have self-accountability and a successful society. And so it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing when people produce things that others want. And they end up making, in many cases, billions of dollars. It doesn't have to be the billions of dollars to be successful, but let's not resent that. Like, I think when we think about the prejudice of either against the billionaire or against the poor person, that prejudice, I think, supposing we eliminated the billionaires. Most of the billionaires, one thing is inheriting the billions. Another thing is creating the billions. Most of that comes from coming up with something that people wanted, and then people spent a lot of money on that thing. And I think if you were to take those items that they created and you say the society is not going to have those items, would you have rather not had them? I think it's all a matter of stop the fighting, be productive, have the life that you want. Not all this fighting and criticism that is going to tear down each other.
Yeah, one thing that I've heard you talk about that I really resonate with is the idea of leading with understanding. Listen first, try to figure people out. I know your stance on China has become controversial, I guess, but when I hear what you say, it's basically understand them. Even if they end up becoming our enemy, to understand them would be incredibly important. Is that a life strategy you have of trying to understand people? Are you somebody who sees yourself as somebody bringing people together? What do you think is that importance in terms of understanding others?
Well, just from really just on seeking understanding is a very practical thing, and it's interesting as could be. And then it has a lot of really good results, because with that understanding, you can understand how to trade things to have win-win relationships rather than lose-lose relationships. So, I think that most people are operating in their perspective of, what's good for them. And then the best are operating with a concept of win-win relationships, that they understand that if I have a win-win relationship, I can, like I have a principle, 1 and 1 equals 3. If there are two of you and you can trade things and you can help each other, that's a win-win relationship, and that is the best. But in order to do that efficiently, you have to understand their perspective, and also their perspective is not as much like a characterization of good and evil. It is them doing what they believe is in their interest. Now, that may do you harm, and you might call that evil, but it's almost that back and forth. So when you have that open-mindedness, so you can understanding somebody else's perspective is not the same as believing that what they're doing is right. You may have a choice, but if you have somebody who has a different religion or a different way of doing things, to at least have an understanding of that, to see it through their eyes, right? You can reject it. You could say, I don't want it, but even then, you have the capacity to deal with it in a much more informed way than if you don't understand it. So understanding, I think, is important. And then, of course, the world works in a way where it's the reality that they will move in a certain way, and then you move in a certain way in those interactions. And if you don't have that understanding of the reasons why, you're never going to be able to play the game, whether that's playing a game against them or playing a game with them to try to produce the best possible outcome. You're never going to be able to do that well. And so, yes, I see this tremendous misunderstanding because there's a tendency to demonize the other side. Okay. And that's, so it becomes a distorted reality in which there's an inclination to go fight and there's misunderstandings. Well, even if you're going to go fight, make sure you've got understanding.
Yeah. So when I was introduced to Taoism when I was probably 16. And so that gave me, when I was young, I really had an obsession with China and Chinese philosophy. And I studied Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, and just really became enamored with the East and Eastern thought. And so for me, it's been almost strange to watch China take on a very different tenor in terms of the way the US perceives China, right? To see this stuff escalating and getting darker and darker. What I find interesting is, like you said, to understand them is not the same as to agree with them. And I think that that's very important. First of all, I'm not a scholar on it, so I don't know. But when I take what you're saying and I apply it to the US of, okay, lead with understanding, lead with trying to figure out where they're coming from, lead with recognizing that if you don't and you encamp into this us versus them, it is inevitable that you conflict. And so when I look into the future, whether I like China or think they're out of their minds, I have no interest in going to war with them. Just the loss of life is just too catastrophic to even contemplate. So I started thinking, okay, how do we bring these together? And you had a key insight in the book that I thought was really powerful. And you said, look, no matter what you think about China, you have to understand that they believe they're doing what is right. You're not going to convince them to do it the American way any more than they're going to be able to convince us to do it the Chinese way. And I found that insight very compelling because you go into this ideological battle when you think, oh, we can convince them, we can win. When you think that you can draw them over to your side, that's one thing. But if you can't, then it becomes a very different game of, okay, how do we negotiate this relationship if I'm not going to be able to convince them? And so in the book, you bring up another idea, which is the idea of dialecticals, two opposing forces coming together, and in the friction is the superior answer. So I know that China looks at themselves that way, and they use dialectics. I think that the US, given the conflict between the left and the right, has to start doing the same thing of saying, hey, we actually need to value this friction. That it's not, I'm not trying to convince somebody on the other side to think like I think. I'm trying not to even think of myself as having a side, if I'm completely honest. But I understand that they're personality types. They see the world differently. They're never going to persuade each other. But hopefully we can let go of some of that, the warfare mentality, and bring people back to a table of compromise. Am I understanding that the dialectical nature of those two opposing forces correctly? And do you think that that is a useful way to, instead of trying to get the other side to agree, to find the strength in that push-pull?
Yeah, yes. And that, yes, totally, unequivocally. And in addition, to understand the cost of lose-lose, and additionally, the issue of sovereignty. The invention of countries, which came in the late 17th century after the 30 Years' War, was one of the great inventions. They were not countries. There were no borders. Amazing thing. There were no countries, there were no borders. The way it worked is most countries were run by families because they were royal families. And there was a constant fighting like I want to go take more, or they would take more, and there was constant fighting. And they had a war, 30 years war, they called it. And at the end of this 30 years war, they were so sick of war that they came up with this idea of countries. So countries that had a border, and that you would determine, those inside those countries would determine what went on in those countries. Back then, they fought whether it should be Catholicism or Protestantism, or whether it was the Pope, or whether it was, they fought about a lot of things. But when they had that, they said, okay, that's what we're going to do, it is we're going to do it within borders. So I think that's interesting. So the idea is that by and large, if you have a domain and it's in your border, that you have control of that, that's one element. Then there's win-win relationships versus lose-lose relationships, and the things that you were talking about. The dialectic forces one to recognize the pros and the cons and to try to get into an equilibrium level. I think that all of that is right. None of these things works perfectly. So the question of, what is it? Can anything go on within those borders and it's okay? Maybe there are common rules that the system as a whole agrees can or can't or something. But those kinds of rules, I think, are important. So as we go down the checklist, live and let live, win-win is better than lose-lose, understand each other, where they're coming from, so that you could do good trades and don't misunderstand. Lose-lose wars are terrible types of things. That doesn't mean there are not things worth fighting for. But if you operate within the parameters of borders, and then it's largely your own business, and then we come to ourselves. And the most important thing, whether there's international or domestic issues, is be strong. Like it's like be healthy. If you're strong and healthy, you don't have to worry domestically and you don't have to worry internationally. And it's just basic things of what's strong and healthy. You earn more than you spend, you're good with each other. You educate your population, you're productive. Those are basics. Be that. Take responsibility for yourself doing that. The United States should take responsibility for itself doing that, like every other country can. And if it does that, it will be strong and it'll be healthy and it'll be fine.
Yeah, Ray. I really want to be in a positive place about where all this is going. I'm such an optimistic person by nature, but there's something about watching that breakdown that you did of the last 500 years. I think I told you this when we were doing the pre-call. I couldn't listen to the book first thing in the morning because it was like putting me in this really almost stressed out state of like, man, go ahead.
But I have a principle.
Please.
If you worry, you don't have to worry. And if you don't worry, you need to worry. Because the thing that I could give you is this worry about realistic things that you can worry about. That's what I want to give the people. That's why I did the video. By the way, the video, you could skip the whole book. The video is animated video. 10 million people have watched it in no time. It's something that's very digestible and it carries the picture. Because if you worry, then you'll do something to prevent those worries. If you worry about going to World War II, if you worry about those, and if we could get enough people who believe in these things, then we will have a different choice, right? There'll be less likelihood of us fighting with each other and doing each other harm, and instead doing more good things that'll raise ourselves and raise our living standards because we have the resources to be doing those things. So, the greatest danger for most people is failing to look at the things that could be harmful to them. because they don't like to look at them. It's like some people would rather not know that they have a serious disease or something. Okay, look at it, deal with it. And then you're most likely to be able to deal with it effectively and minimize problems or take advantage of opportunities. There's a lot of potential here for us to do amazing things, technologies, the ability to think. I mean, we've seen amazingly wonderful things. The capacity for, you have a pandemic and we come up with vaccines, the capacity to get around the fact that we can't get out of our houses. All of that could all raise living standards if we could all work well together.
If you really want to understand the complex financial landscape we all face, watch this conversation with Balaji Srinivasan.
The problems go all the way to the bedrock of the financial system in terms of treasuries being the new toxic waste. It's going to be at least as bad as 2008, but probably worse than that.